And just by way of background, I'm the director for the Bureau of Water Quality at DEP. I became the Bureau Director in April of 2019. Prior to that, I was a Division Director in the Water Bureau on the regulatory side, mainly dealing with discharge licenses. So water withdrawal issues are relatively new to me, and also somewhat new to Bill Sheehan, who you'll meet in a moment, who's the DEP rep on the board. He's the commissioner's designee. He's the relatively new director of the Northern Maine Regional Office. The summer of 2020 was really an eye-opener. It was, as you all know, a severe drought. Particularly in the county, there was a lot of withdrawal activity going on. It was pretty wild. And it really, again, was an eye-opener. At the department, we realized that we've got some work to do in the department to make this system work better. Probably Ag feels the same way. And I think the agricultural community has some work to do. And hopefully we can all do that together. We really saw a need, we touched base with Nancy and her staff, and we really saw a need to get this board up and running again, because I think the legislature really structured this board to be one of the main components to deal with this issue. And so it's great to have the board up and running again, and thanks to all of you for serving. Our goals in terms of the DEP for this is that this is a long-term project. I think there's been a tendency over the years to be active in drought years, and then everything falls by the wayside when it's not a drought year. And we need to keep kind of a constant focus on this and continual improvement. And our goals are that water withdrawal happens in a way that's consistent with the law and the rules, that water quality is protected, and that agriculture is supported. It's supported technically, financially, and with good guidance, good regulatory guidance on how to do this in a way that meets all of those goals. So that's what we hope will happen as we move forward, work with all of you. And I'm not going to be attending future meetings, most likely. Bill Sheehan's going to be our rep. But again, I just want to thank you and welcome you. And I'll turn it over back to Nancy.
Great. Thank you, Brian. At this point in time, just a reminder to mute yourself unless asked to speak. And I'd like now to turn to an introduction of our board members. We have a little bit of time carved out here for the members to introduce themselves, give a little bit of background, and I'd ask about their agricultural water connections and how they see their membership on the board helping to move forward. I'm going to just go in the statutory order in which these members are listed. Could Matthew Porter please introduce yourself and say hello?
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yep.
Hello, everybody. I appreciate the opportunity to serve on this board. My name is Matthew Porter. I'm a sixth generation farmer here in the central Aroostook area. I still farm with my father. We raise about 1,300 acres of potatoes, several thousand acres of rotation crops. We're kind of a cross section right through the Presque Isle area from east to west, all the way through the county here. We started irrigating in 2015. It's been a experience learning the process, and 2020 was definitely a challenge for us to figure out some unknowns that we hadn't seen since we'd started. It's very, very important in our businesses, irrigation going forward for our processors, our sales. So I see a huge value for me to be able to sit on this board, and hopefully I can give some good insight to what's going on in ag in Aroostook County.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate that. Turning next to Darren Hammond.
My name is Darren Hammond. I work for Jasper Wyman & Son. We're a blueberry company in Washington and Hancock County. I served on the previous Ag Water Management Board, and we are a large water user. Years ago, we had the Chapter 587 rules that came about, and since then, we've really worked on making all of our water that we use for irrigation a sustainable supply. So we've got out of a lot of natural ponds. We still use impoundments and significant groundwater wells for our irrigation purposes. But I'm really glad to serve on the board. I design systems, install them, and manage them. So I'd be happy to help in any way I can.
Thank you, Darren. Welcome back. Rick Belanger, I think you've called in.
Yep. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. My name is Rick Belanger. I'm from Lewiston, Maine. We grow a couple hundred acres of mixed vegetables. I was on the previous water management board. I think that this board is important, and I think that irrigation is detrimental to our industry and feeding everybody. And we irrigate different ways. We use trickle irrigation, drip, water wheels. So I have a little bit of experience, been doing it for a while. This year was a challenge, although it was an odd year for us. We were very, very dry, but the water supply was good. And down in our area, we don't have a lot of people drawing from my area. But anyway, I look forward to being on the board. Hopefully, I can I can represent the vegetable people properly.
Thank you, Rick. I'm going to turn to Jake. Jake Pearson, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Jake Pearson. I own and operate Pearson Nurseries down in Dayton, Maine, and southern Maine. I'm a second generation owner. My father, Dale, served on the last water management board. We are one of the largest nursery producers of ornamentals in the state. Our irrigation needs are slightly different and varied from strict farming. Food crops especially, we're a little bit different in that our crops are, much more needy on a daily basis. So we have some different needs, and our industry is a little bit different. But I'm happy to serve. I'm glad that this group gets back together. I think that we know that the future of agriculture depends on a lot of things, but one of the biggest is water. And moving forward, if we can all be on similar pages and know where different groups and different organizations stand, that we're all able to continue to grow food and grow crops in the great state of Maine, and also be as environmentally friendly and positive impact on the environment of Maine. That's I think is an important thing. So I'm happy to serve.
Thank you, Jake. Just a reminder for everyone to mute. I'm going to be on you about that. I'm going to move next to Abby Sidakis, please.
Hi, my name is Abby Sadowskis. My fiance and I operate Apple Creek Farm. We're in Bodenham. We are a grass-based organic livestock operation and use a mix of owned and leased land. So for us, water is important because of our livestock needs, particularly on leased property where there's another household sharing with our livestock. And we also see impact primarily on our hay crop. So a lot of our leased land is to produce hay for our animals. We, as organic farmers, we primarily look at improving soil structure and the ability to hold and store water. And so that's part of what I'm interested in working with this board, is how we can support farmers to implement those tactics. And so I'm glad to be here.
Thank you, Abby. I'm going to turn to the board member who is going to be representing federal wetlands permitting experience and expertise, David Moyse.
Good afternoon. Do you hear me? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, yes, we can.
Hi. My name is Dave Moyse. I guess I'm based on what I'm hearing. I'm definitely the newcomer to the group. Certainly glad to serve. My background is I have a master's degree in soils from University of Maine. I own and operate Moist Environmental Services in Bangor. Recognize a few of you from past experience on projects. I've been doing this about 30 years. Formerly worked for SW Coal Engineering. You probably know those folks. And I'm just glad to we do permitting, we do everything from soils to wetlands to a lot of third-party inspection work. We've worked with the county. My wife's a county girl, so I spent a lot of time in the county, so I'm very familiar with the county and the folks up there and their operations. So certainly glad to bring whatever expertise I can and help the board. I'm glad to serve.
Thank you, Dave. Next will be the board member with agricultural engineering and water use efficiency expertise, George McLaughlin.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's George McLaughlin. I'm employed by the Maine Potato Board, and as Nancy mentioned, I'm an ag engineer and help growers with irrigation water management, from writing plans to implementing funding applications, as well as design and installation assistance. Been involved doing this since 2008 and glad to serve on the board. Irrigation is vital here in the county for a lot of the growers, and just glad to help out with growers and glad to serve on the board.
Thank you, George. And finally, we have the member of the general public who's part of the board, Rebecca Long.
Hi, I work for the University of Maine Cooperative Extension. I'm an agricultural professional based out of Oxford County, but I work on ag projects statewide. My background is, before I worked for Extension, I worked for the Natural Resource Conservation Service as a soil con, and I got to do some agriculture water management plans and some system planning. Before that, I'm actually from Rhode Island, where I worked briefly for DEM and worked in the water quality department there, and I worked on organic vegetable farms. So I have some perspective on water use from farmer side to regulatory to now educational, and I'm excited to be on the board.
Thank you. Welcome everybody. I'm going to skip over Bill because he's going to be introducing himself in a little bit when he's presenting, as well as Bob Marvini. I'd ask Mark Hedrick to say hello as a staff member from the Department of Ag, however. I know I might be putting you on the spot, Mark.
No, that's fine. No, I'm Mark Hedrick. I'm the Nutrient Management Program Manager with the Department of Agriculture, Conservation and Forestry. I've been here, well, a little over 15 years now, I guess, and I get involved with farms that require nutrient management plans, or livestock operations permits, compost management plans. I get involved with some of the larger farms, the CAFOs, the concentrated animal feeding operations, get involved with some right to farm issues as they relate, well, not only to farmers and the public, but also to various municipalities. I get involved with some ag compliance matters and many other things that often tend to come along. So I'm glad to be here and glad to be with you. I'm also clerk of the Nutrient Management Review Board and have been that for some years now. We're in the process of getting that reconstituted as well. So it's great to see all of you.
Thank you, Mark. I think we've zipped through introductions in about 15 minutes, so we're going to utilize that additional time to segue into the third part of our agenda, where Rob Mueller from DEP will be giving a Rule Chapter 587 overview and some history about the creation of this board. And Rob, if you wouldn't mind also introducing yourself and your background, and you're able to share your screen, I believe.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rob Mueller. So I am an engineer with the DEP, the Division of Environmental Assessment, and I've been there since 2007, which is roughly about when we started, things started with this rule. So I just say that I'm not responsible for the rule. I'm responsible for dealing with it. So. And I will share my screen. So I have a presentation that was developed. I'm gonna. It's a lot of information, and I'm gonna try to fit it within a 20-minute slot. And I'm gonna try to go through it fairly quickly. But if someone needs me to stop, feel free to interrupt me. Let me see. Can someone just confirm that they can see that?
We do. Yes. Looks great.
Okay, good. And so I'm going to do one last thing. Does it still look the same?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. So Chapter 587 was a rule that the department was put in place. We were directed to develop this rule. So, and why? Protect these types of resources, these types of organisms. And one fortunate thing was that Maine has a relatively abundant resource, as you can see from these stats. But that isn't a slam dunk. There's some pressures on water use, and kind of this is a table. This table's a little dated, but some of the primary users that were identified back in 2007, and the real reason this group is here today is agricultural irrigation. And so just a few backdrops with water usage. So this is kind of the guidance that we use internally. 1 inch per week, per acre per week. Kind of the basis of any math that I do on my end of things. So potential sources, we've got groundwater wells, but primarily I think most of us are dealing with surface water resources, lakes, ponds, rivers, and streams. And one way or another, this is how we try to gain access to it. And this is one of the potential implications. And I don't even know where some of these pictures were taken, but this is, a fairly large pond area that's been dewatered. And I don't even know if that was from pumping or not, but and this is just a picture of Piscataquis River in a drought condition. So just an impaired during an impaired time of year. So there is a need for water management, and I just say irrigation seems to be one of the increasing demands. I don't have any significant stats there, but there have been a number of droughts in just the last 10, 15 years. And they seem to, be getting a little more frequent. We've also got the Atlantic salmon listing that puts some pressure on this. And so we get into the authorization for the flow rule. And this is just a brief summary of, but the goal here is to maintain in-stream flows and lake and pond water levels, protective of aquatic life and other uses of the water classification. And it tries to allow for natural variation, which, as everyone knows, happens. And just trying to minimize our influence on that. So the statutory authorization was created in 2002. And I guess it took a few years to get there. Here's just a couple bullet points. Basically, the goal of the flow rule is to identify and prioritize infrastructure and funding needs. That's what the flow rule is intended to get us to. And here's a few milestones in the rule development. So it dates back to 2002 with this statutory authorization and a technical committee draft in 2005, public comment spring 2005, draft rule submitted to DEP in 06, and final adoption 2007, just when I was hired. And then, so yeah, the effective date, August 24th, 2007, and there was a built-in grace period, 5 years that was acknowledged to that had been extended once, I think, for a total of 10 years. So that gets us to 2017. So some general principles. I won't hit on all those, but trying to get at reasonable use of all waters without causing harm. And as some may know, we've got Maine has classified all surface waters to fit in one of these categories. And for rivers and streams, we've got 4 classes. C being the lowest class, all up to AA, and then we've got GPA waters for great ponds, lakes. And here's just a map, kind of showing the distribution of these classes and relative percentages where everything falls. And here we get into, so now we're starting to get into the meat of the goals of the flow rule. So as I said before, there's plenty of water in Maine, generally speaking. We're in much better situation than other parts of the country. But having said that, things are dynamic, and there's certainly higher flow times of the year and lower flow times of the year, and we're trying to, the flow rules trying to accommodate those natural variations and to provide allowances that fit within that. So this next graph, is kind of highlights this natural variation. Is my pointer shown on the screen? All right, let me. Yeah, I'm going to make it. Let's see. So this is just generally speaking, all rivers and streams have this same general pattern. So we've got a winter season of somewhat low flows, and then we've all got see this big spring flush of high flows entering into the early summer and summer season, which are lowest flow period of the year. And that's really for this audience, the period when we need to be doing agricultural irrigation, and then we got to pick up towards the end of the year. But so we've got this big sag, which is where we want water that we've got to deal with, and let's see, there we go. And just really quick deal. Here's a picture of some salmon, but why won't my slide? There we go. And so this is that same graph with just different periods of the year. These flows are relied upon by fish and other organisms. So flow standards, so depending on the type of resource, B and C have a base protection level and progressively higher levels of protection as we go up to A and AA. But generally the same principles are applied throughout. It's just a higher degree of protection. So here's a graphic of a plot for the Aroostook River. So there's a USGS gauge in Washburn on the Aroostook River, and the black line shows the measured flows from 2020, so last year with the drought. The red line is a summary of over I think that gauge has been in existence for 80 years, and so that is the average of all those years for each day on that plot. So that's what we can expect from that river on, you know, just any given year in general. And then this magenta line, which is basically a superimposed line there to show the effect of the flow rule on those flows. And since zoom into the summer period, the growing season here, and you can kind of see the implication of the flow rule, what the flow rule means, this purple line, and what the resource can provide. So the red line is just an average year, and you can see you've got when the red line's above the magenta line, there's water to be had, and when it's below the magenta line, it's implied to be off limits to irrigation, to any significant withdrawals. And so you can see the basis here is there's an allowance for water withdrawal, and then progressively below. Well, if you look at the black line for last year, basically the actual line was below the criterion line for a period of, that's June 6th through September, mid-September, well, October, I guess. So technically, by, you know, the intent of the flow rule, that whole period, significant withdrawals were not allowed up in the county. And so, you know, this is for the Aroostook River, but that's a graph that kind of, it plays out in any given, you know, any given resource that we'd be dealing with. And let's see, this plot, not sure I'll talk about that, but here's just a summary of the implications relative to different classes. So A being the highest class, so double A being the highest class. So B and C, you have access to all the water above the flow criterion line. In double A, you have access to only 10% of that water above that flow line. And let's see. And the estimations are just based with a little more conservatism built in. So definitely, so clearly, if you're on pulling from a double A or an A stream, the implications are even a little more severe. And then, so withdrawals from lakes are more based on water levels. So lakes have a little more ability to conserve and store, and the flow rule regulates based on the effect of the withdrawal on the water level. So it limits the range of water level fluctuation to within a prescribed natural range. And basically, it's 1 foot between April and July 31st, and then an additional foot from August on. And here's here's kind of the basis behind the flow, the water level piece, trying to protect this littoral zone, so where drawdowns can dewater and affect any significant aspect of that littoral zone. And so, and the flow rule has a built-in allowance or consideration for alternatives. So that's kind of just what I went over was just a generalization for everything, but we do have some ability to account for alternative conditions. And where we can do site-specific plans and identify BMPs, and it's we can talk about that, I think, a little bit later. we have a mechanism where the department can approve alternative plans. And there is a variance, so community water systems were specifically called out for variance based on that public need. And the rule is not applicable to tidal waters, public emergency, off-stream storage ponds, and I'm going to circle that one. I think this is really a take-home from this. This is where the flow rule tries to go for water need. So if you have a large need, I think the ultimate take-home here is we need to create as much offline storage as possible. Non-consumptive uses are not implicated by the rule. And I mentioned community water systems. So here's where I get involved generally. So how do we determine these flows for each and every circumstance? So if we happen to have a USGS gauge, that's great. Then we can use the actual data and derive actual numbers and refer to the gauge on an ongoing basis to say, hey, we're there, we're not there. We can keep pumping, or we've got to stop pumping. Well, unfortunately, most cases we do not have a gauge, so we need a mechanism to estimate appropriate flows. And so fortunately USGS has provided us with some solutions there where just some mathematical mathematical means for solutions. And so in 2007, this is all we had. Well, now is just this kind of straight text. Now we actually have access to a program called StreamStats, which effectively automates that estimation for us. So anyone can use this. It's a really handy tool. Anyone and everyone can go to their location on the map of the state and get the same exact number that I derive. It really kind of is a great asset for us. So accuracy and limitations associated. So estimating is not the preferred method, but generally speaking, I'd say it's the method of use for about 80+% of our withdrawals. And there's an acknowledged accuracy that falls within this plus or minus 40% roughly. And I'm getting close, so I'm really gonna, so additional legislation in 2006 created the authority for the board. Well, I am close. And I guess this is the final take home. I just, I do a lot of assistance, so I work a lot. I've worked a lot with George on doing these flow estimates, and that's my role in all of this, is to help with the understanding of the rule and the relative implications, and helping to assess the amount of flow that is available at any given site. And I guess that's where I'll leave it. I know that was quick and probably created a lot of questions, but I'll leave it at that, and I'm right at 20 minutes. So
that was a lot of data and a lot of explanation there. I'm happy to entertain questions from the board members about any of that. We do have time remaining here like that. or other staff members if they wanted to add in anything from their perspective. Otherwise, we can move on. All right. Well, certainly understanding that the Chapter 587 is going to be underlying a lot of the discussion of the board going forward, why don't we segue to Bob Marviny, our state geologist and director of the Bureau of Resource Information and Land Use Planning. I think you should be able to unmute yourself, Bob, and
that's done. And
great.
I'll see if I can share my screen. Well, thanks for the opportunity to speak with the Water Management Board this afternoon. As Nancy said, I'm Bob Marviny. I'm the director of the Bureau of Resource Information and Land Use Planning, which includes a number of programs in the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. I'm also a state geologist and director of the Maine Geological Survey. I've been doing that job, director and state geologist, for 26 years now. And I was one of the people involved in those Chapter 587 rules back in the mid 2000s. It was a difficult process to work through all the various aspects, but I think it was a necessary thing to do. And I'm hopeful that moving forward with this board, we can find ways to support water development needed by the agricultural community. So today I'm going to review the drought of 2020, and let's see. So there we are. I'm calling it a review of the 2020 drought, and I have a question mark because in my mind, I'm not sure we're totally out of drought. We may be saying the 2021 drought by the time we're done, but maybe I'll be wrong. Let's hope I am. So we all saw the dry conditions in 2020, streams and rivers that were at exceptionally dry, low levels throughout the state, really, at the peak of the drought, and very dry agricultural fields. The summer was extremely dry in terms of precipitation. So clearly a significant drought. Just a little bit on the nature of drought and what we call drought. There's many different ways to measure a drought, and the first most obvious is the lack of rain and high temperatures that lead to very dry conditions. So that's one measure of drought. Another is soil moisture and condition of plants. Low flow in streams, we all saw it, low stream flows, low lake levels, and the challenges that brought to those in the agricultural community who need water for irrigation. Higher water temperatures and impacts on fish and invertebrates were part of that too. And then lastly, groundwater levels. We definitely saw lower than normal groundwater levels during the summer of 2020. And looking at the U.S. Drought Monitor, it really pulls together a lot of these different types of information to give us a snapshot of drought severity across the country. And you can see those categories. I'm sure you're all familiar with abnormally dry through extreme drought. I'm not going to go into the details of the impacts. A lot of you felt it more than most with your own work. So, but we'll use these color scales, and I'll apologize to Bill Sheehan ahead of time because we're probably showing very similar slides, at least for part of it. So Bill, maybe you can focus more on the impact side, which I'm not going to focus a lot on. Using those same colors and using this graph, it's just a graph of the percentage of the area of the state that experienced one of these levels of drought for some period from this time, from about the middle of May on the left through the middle of November on the right. And you can see in the beginning, the yellow color started actually pretty in very rapid order from almost no drought conditions around the state to most of the state being at least abnormally dry. And that happened in the month of June. We're calling it a flash drought because it happened so quickly, going from the near normal conditions to very dry conditions. And the dry conditions continued through the summer and got more severe as we got into the fall months. And you can see the extreme drought, dark red there, covering probably 10% of the state in late September and early October. And then finally, we got some relief with rains towards the middle end of, well, we got some during October, thankfully, and then continued reasonable rainfall for the remainder of the fall. So just looking at these images, here's where we started in June with the whole state either in abnormally dry or moderate drought conditions. And you'll notice kind of these, the separation of northern Maine and southern Maine a little bit here, where there's a kind of a belt in the middle that the conditions weren't as severe. So southern Maine was having extended drought and severe drought, and northern Maine also. In between, it was a little bit more variable. If we look at September, there's those two areas of extreme drought, one in northern Maine and the other in southern Maine, but everywhere else was severe drought, just about everywhere else. So this was very significant drought and had many impacts and consequences. And then finally, by November, we're starting to see some relief from the drought. And if we're going to look at stream flows now during that period. These two graphs, the one on the left is from northern Maine and the one on the right is from southern Maine. These are from USGS stream gauges. And the colored bars, the green is normal conditions. So this is a graph from January through December. So that's a year-long graph, but it's just showing the period of January, well, it's showing 2 years, I meant to say, 2020 and 2021. So the green is normal, the brown colors are below normal, the blue colors are above normal, and the black line is the actual stream flows in these two rivers, Mattawamkeag River and the Little Androscoggin River, for examples. And you can see that black line, it's fairly normal through spring runoff, March, April, and then into May, it's still normal, but starts to plunge in June and July, and at least the one on the left, it bottoms out at a new record low in September there. That was the lowest it got, and then we had those significant rains in October and November that brought it back up, and pretty much the same on the southern Maine side, except there were a few other rainfall events in the mid part of the summer that brought that river up. But right now we can see that they've gone from above normal conditions in November, December, and have fallen pretty much through the green normal condition band in January and February, and now are close to the boundary between normal conditions and below normal conditions. So that's kind of the situation around the state right now, is that most of the streams with gauges on them, and consequently most of the others, are either near normal or below normal. This is just a map of some of the gauge locations across the state of Maine. There are a lot of gauges that are affected by ice, so they're not shown on here at this time. But these primary gauges on majors or river stems you can see there's only a few that are green, which is normal. And there's a lot in the orange and red, which is below normal. So overall, we're probably below normal conditions in terms of river flows. If we look at the groundwater situation, here are 3 diagrams from, again, USGS monitoring wells. The one on the left is Sanford, southern Maine. In the middle is Augusta. And then the one on the right is Hadley Lake. It's kind of eastern Maine. And again, the same categories, green bands are normal. And the red, the brown and tan is below normal, and the blues are above. And in this case, the red line shows the water levels over the last year. So this is from April of last year through this time, through today, basically. And so on the left of each of these diagrams, we can see good groundwater recharge happened in April and May of last year. And then the Sanford well on the left shows this beautiful, typical summer recession of the water level. And those black triangles are the medians for each of those months. So it follows almost exactly that trend line and gets a little bit below in November and December, and then recharges again as evapotranspiration shuts off in the fall, and we have precipitation, which we did get in October and November, that allows some recharge to the groundwater system. If we look at that Augusta well in the middle, we can see that it was skirting with normal conditions and a little bit below normal conditions for a good part of the summer. But then into September, it went into below normal conditions, and October was very low. But then we had very significant rainfalls, several events of a couple inches each, and it brought that well right back up. And in November and December, it actually hit well above normal conditions. And today it's lower than normal, but I think we're still early in the recharge. We'll expect to see more recharge from spring runoff here in the next month. And pretty much we see the same pattern in eastern Maine, with a long summer recession and then that big boost recharge in October, November. And now we're seeing a recession again. We hope for good recharge from our snowpack this spring. Just putting these, the 2020 drought in a little bit of historical perspective. So this is showing the, again, using that percentage of drought chart that I showed for the 2020 drought, how much of Maine was in the various categories of drought. And 2020, we can see so far, it's a relatively short event, relatively limited in terms of impact of that most severe drought, the red part, that's severe drought. It's pretty similar to 2016, if you look at that in terms of duration, although 2020 definitely affected statewide more than 2016. And if we go back to 2001, 2003, I mean, that was an extended period of drought across the entire state, and much more of the state experiencing severe drought. And if you look at the notes below, there were many periods with severe drought in our past, with very the most severe conditions at 47 to 50. I wasn't around to know anything about that, but I experienced all these other droughts in Maine. I didn't live in Maine in 1963 through 69, but I do remember that drought, and it was enormous expanse over the whole northeastern part of our country. So again, here's a snapshot of the 2016 drought, showing that it was mostly southern Maine and progressively less of an impact into as you traveled north in the state. If we look at 2016 versus 2020, Again, this is this is percent of normal precipitation. We can see the 2020 much greater impact in terms of reduced precipitation across the entire state compared with 2016. And then going back to 2002, we had extreme drought over an enormous part of the state. So I hope we don't approach the 2002 experience again with this drought, and I hope we're on the better side of it now. Here again, just looking at that November 2020 map showing that most of the severe drought has been limited to southern Maine. And if we look today, we've just got a few areas of abnormally dry conditions. Of course, it's a little tough to figure out how the winter conditions apply towards the upcoming growing season. But if we look at, so here's our snow survey maps. So this program involves dozens of cooperators around the state that go out first monthly to collect snow information on snow depth and water content. And then right now, this is happening weekly as we go into spring runoff. And the reason we focus on the spring season is because this is a major contributor to the potential for flooding. And so we work weekly to update this information to know what the potential is for flooding as snow melt occurs from south to north across the state. So the left map shows just water content of the snow. The blue colors are lower water content and the yellows are greater water content. So in northern Maine, there's some sections that have 7 to 8 inches of water content in the snowpack, which is not bad. I mean, that's a fair amount of snow, a fair amount of water. And if we were to all melt at once, that could be lead to difficulties with river flows, particularly on the north flowing rivers. On the right is a comparison of that water content from these measurements were taken last week. But so on the right is a comparison of that water content with the average, with the conditions over the last 10 years. And we see that central part of the state where it's no color, that's close to normal conditions. But the northern part and western part of the state, there are significant areas where the water content of the snowpack is below normal for this time of year. Of course, we're in March. We can have pretty significant snowfalls in March. Last year, we had 12 inches of snow in Augusta on April 10th. So there's still a bit of winter to go here. And these maps will change. You can get to them through the Maine Emergency Management Agency or just by Googling Maine Cooperative Snow Survey, and you'll find these maps. I just want to touch a little bit on the outlook for precipitation and, you know, take it or leave it, 3-month outlook. I don't know how much we can count on this, but at least it's encouraging to see that there's above normal conditions. That's the green area for the Northeast, much better than at least a forecast that is below normal. So maybe we are moving into a period of more normal precipitation. So just in summary, just looking at that information and thinking ahead to our upcoming growing season. So river flows as they are now are mostly below normal. Groundwater levels, they're near normal to touching on below normal. And the snowpack pretty much the same way. The precipitation outlook is encouraging. So I think there's still a significant concern for continuing drought in 2021 based on this being the best information we have to look at right now. So thanks for your time. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Bob. Are there any questions?
Okay, well, thanks. I'll answer any, if some come up later on, fine.
That'd be great. Thank you. And I'm heartened by the green on that final slide that you showed, although, yeah, 3 months out, that's a bit crossing our fingers on that one. Well, we have reached the 1 hour mark, and we do have about another hour's worth of discussion ahead of us. I'm happy to plow forward if that would be the will of the board, or we can just take a short break. Anyone want to weigh in on their druthers? All right, well, why don't we take keep going? All right, well, I'm going to stand up in a few minutes, but yes. How about we keep going? And Bill Sheehan, could you move forward with your presentation, please?
Sure. Maybe. Let's see.
And also introduce yourself while you're at it.
Oh, two things at once. Okay. Thank you. I'm Bill Sheehan. I'm the regional director for the Maine DEP in the Northern Maine Regional Office. I'm, as Brian alluded to, I'm brand spanking new, even though I've got a gray beard. I've been working for Maine DEP for about 30 years, 31 years. I grew up in Northern Maine and lived and worked on a farm as a boy, picked potatoes and milked cows. And I'm not having luck. Let me see what I've done with my presentation here. I got Bob's open.
Well, if you want to give it again, Bill, that's okay with me.
I recognize some of those slides as you alluded to. Wow. Sorry about this.
I'm happy to try and put it up too, if that would be helpful.
I'm almost there.
Okay.
I'm feeling. Yeah. There it is, I think. Can you see it?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Again, thanks for the opportunity to be a member of this board. As I said, I've worked for DEP for the past 30 years, and I worked in the water division. Brian was my boss for 20 of those years that I worked with DEP. And I mostly worked in the water quality division and focusing on keeping water clean. A lot of my job wasn't about making sure that we had enough water to go around. So I'm learning a lot about that and the needs of everybody who consumes water and withdraws water. So Bob already spoke quite a bit about the 2020 drought. I'll just give you the perspective from Northern Maine. We got into the game early this year, but the drought was probably one of the most severe we've had in a long while. It was long duration, but particularly long duration in Northern Maine. And as Bob said, may still be ongoing. We're a little worried about that. The drought task force, which you'll learn about if you don't know about, was up and running this year, and I stole a bunch of their materials for this presentation. And it was the first severe drought since the Chapter 587 that Rob spoke about was promulgated. So as Bob said, the onset was a rapid flash drought, which means it pretty much manifested itself in under a month or about a month. And we had crazy record high temperatures in northern Maine. We strung together more than 10 days in the 80s. We had a number of days in the 90s. Early on, we were having fish kills just because lake water was getting so hot. It would rise to the surface, and then winds would come up in the afternoon and push this thick layer of hot water down to the end of the lake, and it would mix rapidly in a cove and trap lots of fish in small areas, and there'd be low oxygen because the water was so warm. And we had substantial fish kills early in the season. That gave us an idea that something was going to be different. In all, we logged over 13 weeks in northern Maine in severe or extreme drought, and parts of Aroostook County had up to a 10-inch precipitation deficit by the end of the season. And again, as Bob mentioned, we did have record-setting low flows at times in the Aroostook River, the Fish River, which flows north to and goes into the St. John at Fort Kent, the Mattawamkeag River, which is a tributary of the Penobscot and flows through southern Aroostook and northern Penobscot County, and the Penobscot River, which is another tributary of the St. John that is drains the southern Aroostook area. You've seen a number of these drought monitor maps. I just try to pick a few from early in the months. June, the first week of June, we really had no issues at all. By the first week of July, we were already hitting severe drought in the northern part in the St. John River Valley, and we were in severe drought for most of the rest of the state. So 5 weeks later, we pretty much, most of the state is in some sort of dry or stress conditions, and drought is covering about 4/5 of the state. Aroostook County is at that point in severe drought. And then September, the bottom really dropped out, and a big swath of central Aroostook. This looks like Porter country here, is where we got real extreme droughts happening, and a lot of problems sprung up. And here's pretty much, this is the last days of the really bad drought. It started to rain by the end of the first week in October, but this is about as bad as it got with widespread drought statewide. Rob showed you this picture. This is the USGS. This is called a hydrograph. It's a map of what was measured for flow in the river, in this case, the Washburn, Aroostook River and Washburn. And going forward, I know we're going to be talking and using these quite a bit, but this shows you the yellow triangles are the median flows, the averages that are seen over the 83 years, or 89 years, I guess this particular gauge has been in operation. You can see the summer months pretty much from June, the first days of June, all the way through into mid-October, we were well below median. So moving away from what the conditions were setting it up, I wanted to also mention what our water withdrawal sources are in northern Maine. We don't have many drinking water supplies that are surface water anymore. We've only got a couple left. Most communities have switched over to groundwater systems. But as far as for large-scale agricultural withdrawals, primarily we're still taking out of natural flowing water or existing ponds and lakes. Some farmers use in-stream reservoirs. These are, old farm ponds that were built in a stream. years ago, or just existing wide spots in the stream. There's lots of constructed off-stream storages. They're being built annually. There's a lot of interest in them, but these are costly. And as we saw this year, during extreme extended droughts, they don't meet the storage needs for the crop. And we do have one broccoli farmer has drilled wells and is storing water in ponds. This is just a point I wanted to make to support, to show you the dates on this. By mid-August, most farms that had off-stream ponds had utilized their supply of water. And that was just to keep the potato and broccoli crops alive. This wasn't to improve yields necessarily. It was just plants were under stress and they needed water. So this is not a good time to be out of water. So it's about that time. Our main DEP receives a lot of phone calls. We get a lot of complaints, and that's a big part of my job. And the staff here at this office is responding to complaints and checking on compliance. So just in our little region, we received over 100 complaints that had to do with water withdrawal related concerns. And there's a whole host of concerns, and but a lot of them involve the overutilization of the resource, and in some cases dewatering. So what I'd like to do from here on out in my discussion is I want to take you through just the problems that we saw. I'm not identifying anybody in them, but I just want to point out the impacts that we saw, that we received complaints on, and just want everybody to take a look at these and think about them, and we'll certainly have a little bit of discussion here at the end. But just different types of areas where we can improve, and that's the hope for this water board, is to manage our water withdrawals. So the first and primary concern was the dewatering of streams and wetlands. And the reason for this, it seems pretty simple, is you set up and pull more water from a stream than the stream has in it, so that it stops flows. We have in this pictures here, I don't know if you can see my pointer. This is a small swampy stream, but there was a wide spot upstream where water could be pulled out of it, and it stopped the flow of the stream. And this stream had fish in the though it doesn't look like much, it had fish in the pools. It was definitely a stream. A larger stream, this is more of a second order stream, a little bit bigger culverts. But again, this was just a single pumping on the upstream side of this road, pretty much took all the water, so that the stream bed was no longer wetted. There was no connectivity between pools, and so fish had to abandon these stretches, and aquatic organisms that were attached to the rocks died, and the ones that could move tended to get into wet spots or try to hide under rocks and stay alive. Here's this is a picture, just a large cattail flooded wetland. It's probably partially a beaver pond, but it was a fairly sizable wetland that got pumped out of, and just the water being taken out was substantially more than the water coming in the inlets. So the wetland vegetation was dewatered and forced all the aquatic organisms to either flee the area or perish. You can see on on some of these dates, this isn't all 2020. I'm throwing up pictures, but I've included pictures from the past. We've had dry times in 5 of the past 6 years when we fired up our irrigation in northern Maine. So while they may not be droughts, extended, even short-term dry spells, if you've got irrigation equipment, you're going to use it to reduce the stress on your crop. So we are pulling water and withdrawing almost annually now, at least in central Aroostook. A fairly large issue this summer was the dewatering of streams because of withdrawals from impoundments upstream. While you may have a big pond on a stream and there's a lot of water in that pond, if the discharge end of that pond is over the top of a dam, it doesn't take long before you've ceased all the flow in the outlet stream. And that's right in the rules, as Rob highlighted, that you have to maintain the flows downstream and you have to maintain aquatic base flow. And it's pretty easy to find yourself in violation of that. These two ponds are both in, these two dams and ponds or impoundments are in Mapleton. One on the left is a small farm pond with a concrete dam. And on a tributary of the Presque Isle Stream. The one on the right actually is a dam in downtown Mapleton, which has it was an old mill dam, and the dam has an overflow. And the dewatering of this particular pond also got the water levels down below the level of the dry hydrant in town for fire protection. So it was a big concern. This is another example. This is actually a fairly large stream in Limestone. Again, this is downstream of a large impoundment. This is the outlet of Trafton Lake in Limestone. It's a man-made flood prevention pond, but we had several growers that were irrigating out of that pond, and there were no provisions made to maintain the downstream flow. So this outlet, Webster Brook, dewatered and was dry for about 2 weeks, and about 2 miles of the stream were completely dry in August. And you can see the difference between the flows normally and during the drought. So one of the big, probably most concerning aspects of dewatering streams was the problem with fish kills. Maine is one of the last bastions of native wild brook trout in the United States, and particularly in the East. Inland Fisheries and Wildlife spends a lot of time managing for it. It's very popular recreational aspect of our economies. And what happens when these streams get dewatered, it isn't that there's no water, it's just that we end up with very little flow, such little flow that the fish can't move between pools, and they'll get trapped into a pool where they're more susceptible to predators. But the most severe effect was coupled with the high temperatures that we had this summer. These pools are typically, a lot of them are in the sun. The water warms up through the day as the sun moves, and warm water can't hold the amount of oxygen that cold water can. So the fish begin to suffocate on the hot days in the afternoon. And we received quite a few complaints of fish, all kinds of fish, not just trout, but trout are some of the most sensitive species in northern Maine. And these guys would just not do well. This particular fish here was still upright, but it was floating with its back fin was out of the water. It was gasping, and even though there was hardly any current, the fish kept dropping to the end of the pool and getting stuck on the rocks, and then it would swim up. And there were several other dead fish there, and there were scavengers there grabbing the fish that were stressed. One particular problem that was a little more insidious was as we got in later in the season, we had a couple growers that were taking matters into their own hand in some places and going upstream from their irrigation water sources and breaching dams and actually busting open beaver dams to send slugs of water down to their irrigation pumps. And we had a number of beaver ponds that were broken open to send a slug of water to give a very short-term water supply to water a crop that was stressed. This is just one of several beaver dams on this particular stream that got breached. This particular guy was going in, putting his pump in after dark, late at night, and then breaching the dams and sending slugs of water down, pumping them through the night, and then pulling his equipment out in the morning, which was pretty clear. He's trying to be sneaky. But he also he used a brook that had a USGS gauge on it, so we could see the slugs of water coming down right from our office. This is during a period where there was no precipitation, and this little hydrograph shows you that the stream flow was about 1 CFS, very low flow, but then all of a sudden we were getting little slugs depending on the size of the beaver dams that he breached. And these slugs of water would go by the gauge and then be sucked up for the crop a little further downstream. So those are some of the more severe things that we see for impacts on the aquatic environment that were directly related to the water withdrawals. We received a lot of other complaints and concerns expressed about a number of other things, which are environmental. Some of them were nuisance type things, I just wanted to run through them and just on an awareness level, not picking on anybody, but a lot of these were quite common and common sources of complaints to the department and frustration with the public. Riparian disturbance. Riparian means the shoreline along the edges of streams and along lakes. That area within the last 100 feet before you get to the water, high water mark is the riparian area, and you can get access to the water, but you need a permit, and there's special considerations for that. Oil and fuel spillage was really out of hand. We saw a lot of it, and in a lot of cases, this was on the below the high water mark. Pumps were moved way out into the river bottom that was now bare, and then we were losing oil and nobody was cleaning it up. And this was like if you were in your dooryard, pretty significant. So just sloppiness on that. We also had complaints about runoff and erosion from over application, as well as water waste from overspray in woods. We're taking water out of streams that people are concerned about, and then to irrigate the highway or to put water in somebody's rolled down passenger window just isn't a good look. Talk a little bit about disinfection and chemical additives. That's happening, and we had some just basic nuisance complaints that we need to think about. So Moving on to some examples of unpermitted shoreland disturbance. This is on the Aroostook River. We had several of these where guys needed to get access to the river and just got an excavator or a dozer and came in and punched a hole through the shoreline and went down and made a place for their pump without a permit. You can do this. There's standards and it requires a permit, but we had a number of farmers that just took matters into their own hands and did this. We had a couple of farmers, well, one in particular that was installing a center pivot irrigation system, wanted it to go most of the way around and had a swath of shoreland and a brook on one part of it. So they built a road for the wheels to go on and chopped down all the shoreland vegetation alongside this trout brook. The center pivot would travel over this now, but total removal of the vegetation was not allowed. It's another example. This is just getting access to a low swampy pond, putting fill in the swamp, in the wetland to get access. DEP wasn't particularly thrilled by the old leaky oil pump truck that was put there to provide lots of diesel for the pump either. Just didn't like that old truck sitting there right on the edge of the lake. And you can see the new material that was put into the swamp here. Oil and fuel spills were a big one. We heard a lot about this. In particular, when pumps were back down below the high water mark of a stream and set up to be able to reach the water, but then losing petroleum on the shore and not making any effort to contain it or keep it cleaned up if it did spill. You can see this red pump here. This was being fueled by a pedal truck that would come in and they would pump the diesel into the tank here. And you can see where they drug their hose and dribbled out diesel as they're retracting their hose. This green pump here, we had leaks from 3 different spots on this pump, pretty severe. We had the overfilling of the diesel tank. There was a stain of diesel over here. We had motor oil that blew out all over the rocks here from the engine, and then some pump lubricant vegetable oil that would juiced out on the pump end of the unit. And we just the fisherman that saw that wasn't impressed, and we had to clean it up. Another issue is irrigation, calibration, and making sure that your application of irrigant of water is being used by the crop and not getting away at the end of the rows. And this is a broccoli field that was being irrigated by guns, so it was pretty heavy duty, but there was an exceptional amount of water. These were running all through the night and not attended when I was there. And water was running out of most of the rows, and it scoured this pretty hot water was going downstream and down the hill and back into the stream, and was carrying mud and impacting the stream that the water was being taken from. We had a lot of complaints about irrigation of the road. I was out at this one. I think this was like 5 in the morning on the 1st of July, but this gun was irrigating the roadside and the ditch, and got a complaint from a guy. not long before this about getting irrigated on the way to work. Another issue which really didn't generate complaints, but it was a concern for DEP, is the impacts of system drainouts after irrigation. Pipelines can go for parts of a mile, up to a mile, up hills now, and an 8 or 10 inch pipe laying in the hot sun for a day. The water, that's a lot of water in it, and that water gets hot, and if it's discharged in the wrong spot, can warm up and kill a brook quickly. We also can have a lot of impact from drain out happening, a big slug of water coming down a hill. There's a lot of velocity, and if you're not breaking that pipe in places and doing it in small increments, you can end up with a big scour on the edge of a brook or a lake or a pond, and it just blows a bunch of material into the river. So it's a concern, and we've actually had, we have seen where drainouts have impacted smaller streams. This particular picture is on the Aroostook River, and there was just a big fan of material out downstream here that had blown out of this bank. And it had scoured a channel probably 3 feet deep down through the edge of the bank. There is potential for chemical discharge. Not so much, it's not particularly common. The broccoli growers are adding disinfectant, chlorine disinfectants to the last irrigation before harvest. And chlorine's a pretty strong toxic chemical. And so you add this chlorine to it and irrigate the broccoli, and obviously you want the broccoli to be safe and to be clean, but you now have a charged pipe filled with chlorinated water. So it needs to be managed in such a way to make sure that that chemical gets where it belongs and doesn't end up back discharging into a stream or another receiving water. I know there's potential for fertilizer applications as well. So we're going to need to be thinking about that as well going into the future of how we keep these types of activities from impacting our waterways. This picture is a little spot. It's a popular spot where I've had several different farmers use this location for water withdrawal. This is a tractor mounted PTO pump sitting on a, oh no, I guess this is diesel powered, but this pump is sitting here on the edge of the stream. The intake's right here. Farmer dug a little channel in the bottom to make sure that as the river went down, this river was used heavily. There was like 13 different pumps on this particular river. So water was being drawn down significantly just from the cumulative use. But the issue we had is just a couple hundred, not even a couple hundred yards up the stream was a guy who really didn't want to complain, but after the 4th or 5th night of this thing running full bore under his bedroom windows, he just was not thrilled about it and wanted to know what. And truthfully, this tractor really did blat, and you know, it wasn't like cultivating a field, getting in there and the equipment running for a few hours or a day or two and getting out of there. This thing was going all the time for several days. So he shared his noise with me. The last thing that I just throw in, this, I was getting, I got a few complaints from town public works managers or road guys talking about encroachments of rights of way. Both of these, we had a couple on public roads, even though this is a dirt road, it's a public road. Blocking it off and, you know, sending people out through the headlands of the field. This farmer did provide an access around, but still generated complaints. And I really don't have to explain about running a pipe across an active train line. That should be pretty self-explanatory. Not a good idea. So my purpose for bringing these up is I think we've got some room here to improve our management practices, and I think this board would probably be a good group to maybe dust these off and start communicating about what's the proper way to do water withdrawal and irrigation, so that we can prevent these sort of things, reduce the amount of complaints, and, you know, focus our efforts on things like providing sustainable capacity for water withdrawal through the seasons, coming up with other things. And it's better for the DEP and the environment, and it's better for all agricultural concerns. So I guess with that, I'll wrap up. I'm happy to talk about any of these, or if, you know, and I'm not trying to be negative and I'm not trying to point fingers, but I want to increase the awareness and think about, you know, this seems like some low hanging fruit that we can address and work on to make it better for all water withdrawal.
Well, thank you, Bill. I think at this point, we've had a lot of staff talking about, you know, background rule chapters, the drought, and the ramifications of and really detrimental environmental impacts that can occur in drought conditions when irrigation resources are scant and sometimes poorly managed. So at this point, I'd really like to open it up to our board members. We're still at agenda number 6, where I'd like to hear your reflections about the drought through the prism of just this board in general and your own experiences. And Abby earlier mentioned, you know, soil health and also the implications to the hay shortage that many of our producers experienced this year. You know, are there any other things about 2020 and the drought and your experiences to date that you think are worth flagging or discussing right now before we move forward? And again, it's all within the context of that this board can really dig into some of these issues in future meetings and talk about prioritizing actions and so forth. Feel free to unmute yourself.
If I may, Nancy, can I add a few comments? I think one thing the board also needs to be aware of is, and I mostly involved with potato crops, but typically to grow a potato crop, you need 14 inches of precipitation to grow that crop. As has been conveyed all through this meeting, 2020 was a drought year, and if you looked at the precipitation data from the end of May all the way through, there was a big negative shortfall, and I think a lot of irrigators, I know a lot of Bill's slides unfortunately show negative impacts. I think Mother Nature created a lot of negative impacts as well that enhanced some of that. Although some of Bill's pictures were from other years, and I understand them. But I also would like the board to be aware, a lot of the irrigators aren't looking to provide supplemental irrigation for their entire year of growing. Most of those plans are written for 3 to 4 inches of supplemental irrigation. So if you start out on like we did this year, it's extremely challenging And I think a lot of growers did manage things correctly. Unfortunately, there are some negative users, but I just like to throw that out that unfortunately on a year when it is 2020, the flow rule is written to restrict withdrawal. And yeah, if we would have been compliant with Mother Nature and whatnot, we wouldn't have been able to irrigate anything, and there wouldn't have been a crop period. We had a significant reduction in yield. I think Matt would contest to that, being a grower. I don't know how the blueberry industry was affected, but overall, I think Bill had some good points. I think we need to implement and or provide educational things for BMPs. Maybe that's something the board could look into, or maybe it's not the board's role. But anyway, I just think that's something that we want to keep in the back of our minds as we get more involved, if you will, is the simple fact that the flow rule is the flow rule, but we're also, we can't fix Mother Nature on a year of this magnitude.
Thanks, George. I see that Abby has her hand up. Go ahead, Abby.
So this is kind of goes back to the first presentation. I know that the flow rule does affect, streams and surface water. I'm curious, given that first slide where it showed that agriculture uses about 2% of that water, if one of the speakers could just help me understand, that is also going to impact the availability of groundwater. And in southern Maine, where I am, and most of the land we use, it's not irrigated, or we're using wells. And so when I think as a farmer about all the available tools that I have, it does seem to me important to understand, how the two are related, if that makes sense.
Rob or other folks in the DEP?
Yeah, so that was my presentation. So I'm sorry, but I'm not sure I understand the question exactly. So 2% was the number on that, that figure. I'm not sure, as George kind of highlights, the flow rule operates without any. Basically, the basis of the flow rule is any normal year, there's going to be periods where surface water withdrawals are inaccessible. I mean, that's kind of a basis of that derivation. Half, if every year was average, there would still be half the year where water would be defined as inaccessible. And so, like George mentioned, last year was not an average year. It was below average the whole growing season. And that's, and on that one, another slide further down there, I tried to highlight that the better we can store water. So offline storage, again, is kind of the drive home, in that the flow rule doesn't allow for access to free-flowing water 100% of the time. I mean, that's the basis of the rule. And I don't know, that's kind of rambling, but I hope that kind of gets at the question a little bit.
Abby, did you want to put a finer point on that, or?
Well, I guess I'm asking, so what impact does that other usage of groundwater have on all of these other categories of water that are available for irrigation? Does that make more sense?
Yeah, well, so groundwater use, the flow rule would drive you towards groundwater use as a more reliable source. I guess getting at that, because there's the restrictions are far less. There are restrictions potentially if you're pulling water from right adjacent to a surface water resource, but you know, groundwater is not infinite either, I guess. But it certainly is as a safeguard. I think that's a safer source water with regards to the flow rule.
Matt, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to touch base a little bit with George and what Bill, his presentation. Bill, I appreciate you not having any pictures of my farm in there through the presentation. You know, that kind of paints a dreary picture here in Aroostook County. I think that's worst case scenario, Bill. I think you might agree with that. That wasn't all the farms. I hope everybody realizes that. I had questions mid-season, not really knowing, you know, the extremes we were in and what we were going to. The Presque Isle DEP office is great to call, talk to, answer questions, and work with us. I did want to kind of touch, because it gets back to soil health too. Our farm has been really driven by soil health and long rotations and holding that water in our soil. But for risk management, irrigation is such an awesome tool for us to be able to get above and beyond what that will limit us to. So we've made some big investments, but irrigation, even on these dry years, you know, where we don't need as much, really shows. 2020 was unbelievable, the difference. In most cases, it was at least a third of our yield we gained in irrigation back. So I think as managers of farming operations, we need to be more mindful of how much we apply and the timing of that application. It kind of follows into the holding capacities of ponds when we can put on. So I think there's a lot here that we can manage to do this better. But the BMPs for the growers in Aroostook County, I think that would be a great checklist to put together. You know, maybe have a meeting or two where growers can see that a little better and clearly and do a better job going forward.
Thanks, Matt. I'm happy to sort of segue this conversation into the next part of our agenda, where we're kind of talking about the structure and the mission of the board, because, you know, the presentations and discussions today, we can all agree that 2020 was an extraordinary year and did create stresses upon the resource across the state. But ultimately, this board is primed to look at the overarching situation around agricultural water use in general, drought years or not. And I'd love to hear from members of the prior board, you know, Darren and Rick, if they wanted to opine on sort of where they recall prior board activities really focusing. And I'll just remind us all that there's a bunch of tools in the toolkit here for this board's duties. It's overseeing and coordinating the development of water sources for agriculture. That's a pretty broad topic area. Spent a lot of time discussing what that means. Making recommendations for improvements to permitting processes. I see that there are a lot of folks from NRCS on this phone call, and we would certainly be happy to invite them back for another board conversation to really pry and delve into that area to the extent that they can add some value there. The board also works to secure funding for the construction of environmentally sound water sources for ag use, and there was a fund, a small fund, that was quite popular about a decade ago, as I understand it. You know, is that something we focus on as well? There's utilizing data to prioritize watersheds, and et cetera. So I just want to say that there's a lot of good work that we can do. And yes, 2020 was a real eye opener, as was the drought of 2006, et cetera. But let's look at the big picture too. So Darren and Rick, anything you'd like to add about this year or prior board?
The prior board we did secure some funding, and I Jasper Wyman and Son actually did receive a grant for a significant groundwater well, which was a small portion of the cost, but it did allow us to get out of 2 natural ponds. Today, we've done a lot. All of our impoundments that we have aquatic base flow valves in them. We take the water off in the bottom of the pond and off the top, so the stream flow, the water is colder. We actually test out. We do monthly measurements of groundwater just to see the ebb and flow of the groundwater naturally. We've also been proactive in securing permits to increase the levels of some of our dams to make sure that we have water. So the original intent of the board was to be able to comply with the Chapter 587 rules. And I don't think that, back when the board was first constituted, we realized that in a severe drought, we couldn't comply with the Chapter 587 because everybody needed to pump. So I think going forward, we haven't had a drought in a number of years. That is where we need to, I think that's the way we need to go. We need to look to secure funding and try to get existing irrigation systems out of natural flowing water. That was the intent of the board, at least for the 10 years that I served on it. But I think, we got to continue to be proactive. All of Wyman's irrigation systems, we have 100% containment on all our fuel sources. There is a lot that we can do and to educate other farmers.
Thanks, Darren.
Go ahead.
The
only other thing that I will say is, as far as significant groundwater wells or groundwater wells, the playing field as far as permitting, I have found is not even. It is much more difficult to get a permit to do a significant groundwater well in the unorganized territories, almost to the point where it's not worth it if you can find an alternative source. The DEP is really great to work with, but the permitting for the unorganized territory is onerous at best.
Thanks, Darren. Rick, if you're still on and would like to add about your experiences, floor is yours. No, perhaps not. Anyone else want to add any questions or comments, reflecting on this year, reflecting on ag water use in general? Oh, I see some hands up. I don't know who these folks are. Oh, Jake, go ahead.
Hi there. So I think that obviously we all know that, agriculture is a huge part of Aroostook County's cultural and heritage, and it will continue to be for a long period of time. But I think that it seems that right now, from today's presentations, we don't have a lot of information or data that we've seen as this group about south of Bangor. And yes, agriculture might not be as big of a piece, but I still think it's significant, again, because we're going to be under more pressure there for water needs for population growth. The housing market is exploding in southern Maine and doesn't show any sign of slowing down. And I believe that there's just going to be more and more pressure put on our water sources in southern Maine, which, again, as agriculture is a little bit smaller of a stick in southern Maine, we may have a little bit more work to do with those interactions that we're not as thought of as a big a piece of the pie. So I think that needs to be something that the board keeps in mind, that that the issues that will occur may be different in different parts of the state, and that's something that I think is something that maybe hasn't been part of the past thought process. But how can we coordinate educating and communicating with the general public about what we're doing and what ag is doing to be proactive about our water use, especially in areas that are that are having more issues with population growth. Bill mentioned the folks calling about complaints about leaking from pumps, noise, all those things. Those are all pieces that are going to be a bigger part of the concerns in southern Maine maybe than they are in some of the more northern parts of our state.
Yeah, great points. Thank you, Jake. I do want to ask our DEP and DACF staff for a second. Bob, I'm assuming that your shop would be able to, if we think about it, compile some updated information about water resources. I mean, the concurrent board that you're running right now, or planning committee that you're helping with, I think might be a source of some useful information sharing about water resources. So I'm just focusing on the data.
Right. So the Water Resources Planning Committee, which is a stakeholder group, it includes ag, but it's beyond. It's other water users as well. And the purpose of that is to just facilitate communication about water use across multiple sectors in the state. So we do collect some of that information, and we have good tools now that'll help us estimate, agricultural water demand across the whole state. And we're trying to improve also the groundwater monitoring network so that we have, more densified information on how groundwater resources are responding, particularly to climate change. But and they're not focused, they're not paired with withdrawal sites, but we're looking at kind of the baseline background of how groundwater resources are behaving over decades of time. So we're working to improve those resources. We're working to understand what they tell us about trends and what we know about water use demands over time, and how that might intersect with available water resources.
Then I would suggest that we put our heads together about how to weave some of those data points and information into this board.
Sure.
As we move forward. Obviously, that's going to be really critical to that. I do see some members of the public who would like to ask some questions or weigh in, but before I do that, any other board members?
Yeah, Nancy, Dave Moyes, I have a quick question.
Of course.
Just trying to educate myself here a little bit. On as far as the users go, when the acreage is the acreage really increasing as far as users go, or is it just that the current users using more, or using it in a different, trying to use it a different way, as far as like going to wells versus surface water, like Darren? I'm just curious if someone can summarize that, just my own knowledge.
I'll defer to our farmer members here in DEP, but it would be the latter in my opinion. But
my impression, Nancy, is the irrigation is, popular, increasing, used annually, and the level of interest, it just continues to grow. I think, Matt can chime in, or George, but, just what I've watched and seen, and all the discussions I've had, lots of people are interested in irrigating their crops that aren't irrigating now, and farmers that are irrigating are looking to expand. And, once you have that equipment and the ability, you can use it. It doesn't have to be a drought. You may have a 3-week dry time, and it's time to use that. You're going to use that water to improve your yield and support your crop. Did I get that right, George?
Yeah, well, pretty much in the past 10 years, we've seen a significant increase. I mean, most of our processors are looking to get a small percentage, like Matt mentioned, for risk management. So we do have a few more irrigators, yes. One thing I will imply though is, fortunately, the majority of those have been provided assistance through NRCS funding and implemented much more efficient equipment. Historically, 20 years ago, there were very few pivots in the area. Everybody had traveling guns, and those aren't the most efficient systems out there. The ones that, the planners, if I will, the guys that are in it for long term have put in systems that instead of, for instance, a traveling gun runs at a minimum of 350 gallons a minute. I know a lot of guys that put center pivots in, managing the resource, they're only pumping at 200 gallons a minute. So we are seeing more demand, but I also think 80% of them are putting their best foot forward, buying good equipment. But unfortunately, yeah, there are times when, like Bill said, when August comes, we're right down to crunch time. We're trying to get a crop off that's marketable, and we're pumping. You know, the need is significant. It's there. Now since 2008, I'll go back a little bit. In 2008, when I first started, there was funding through the department. There were, for those agricultural marketing assistant grants, they would be $80,000 per project, and most of those were utilized for resource development. $80,000 doesn't go very far in pond construction, but it was a good program. I helped a couple different growers get assistance and implement those type structures. We haven't seen a lot of pond construction up until 19 was a dry year as well. In the last 3 years, I've seen more growers interested in investing money in pond construction to manage their irrigation systems, because you might be able to use an irrigation system and apply. Sometimes I've had growers tell me, if I could get an inch of water on it, it would make all the difference in my crop. So I've got guys that, this irrigating thing, if you had to pay for it all out of pocket, you might as well just quit farming. But there are guys that are managing things and doing things correctly. And if whatever the board can do is helpful. But yeah, to answer that question about are there more people irrigating, I would say so. And is the water demand higher? I think it is. Yeah. So that's something we, moving forward, we take into consideration as well.
Thank you.
Dave, did you have any other questions?
No, that was it. I was just trying to characterize it. So thank you.
No, it was definitely a great question. What is the scenario on the ground right now? Always a good place to start at. I'm going to turn. I know that Don Flannery has had his hand up for a little while. Happy to invite you to make a comment, but also board members, feel free to keep this conversation going.
Hi, Nancy. Thank you. A couple of things. One is George did a good job just then explaining it. For you that don't know me, I'm Don Flannery with the Maine Potato Board. And I'm going to address the question I think, Nancy, you asked about what should the board be doing. And I know you've heard me say this. Bill Sheen has heard me say this, and Matt Walker, NRCS, and others on here, and Matt and George. But I think one of the major responsibilities, or some of the major responsibilities for this board, would be obviously the BMPs. I think that's extremely important, not only for growers in Aroostook County, but for anyone irrigating across the state of Maine. I think that's right up there on step 1 or 2 that the board should be undertaking. The other one is using those as outreach and education. I think that a lot of growers, that would be beneficial. A lot of it would help address the what Bill had talked about as it relates to complaints and, doing that. And then the other thing that we've talked about, Nancy, back last fall, is I think this board needs to get more involved. And I hate to use the word enforcement, but maybe it's an extended outreach, as we do with other programs such as the cow pile disposal program, where the department's involved in maybe addressing some of these calls rather than sending DEP out there first. If there's a complaint, if there's a concern someone has, maybe it's the Department of Ag that goes out and talks to that grower, works with that grower to resolve it, rather than DEP showing up at the doorstep. We do that in our industry, as I said a minute ago, as it relates to cow piles, and it works really well. And I think that would go a long ways because that's part of that education and outreach. So necessarily DEP doesn't answer every call and every complaint. And on the other side of it, I think it was said early on and many times during the presentation today that Maine has water. What we've got to do is make it available to us when we need it. And to that end, we have been supportive, and I've talked with Bill Sheehan, and we've talked with NRCS, we've talked with the department. To make that happen, we're going to need funding, because what we've got to do is contain that water when it's available to use when we need it. And we have already begun those discussions at the federal level with the delegation about how this is going to be needed in Maine, not only for the potato industry, but for anyone irrigating in Maine. And I think that if the state, this board, and then for the state makes that a priority, I think we can make some of those funds happen within the department. And folks will remember, Nancy, back, and you probably remember the Blueberry Commission back years ago, the state made nutrient management a priority. And through that, NRCS was able to get additional funding into Maine to address that and build manure pits to contain that and deal with nutrient management. I don't see this as any different. If this board takes this on and says, this is a priority, we need to be able to provide sustainable, environmentally sound water sources for agriculture in this state, and it's a priority, then I think there's support out there to getting some funding to do it. It ties back in. I know I wasn't a hero the other day on a bill in front of the Ag Committee when I opposed a bill for healthy soils, but it wasn't that I was opposed to healthy soils, but ties into healthy soils. It ties into everything. And I think that if this board takes that on and makes that a priority for this state and gets the administration to make that a priority, I think we can find some resources to help these growers. So, you've got, from the potato side, with Matt and George, and Bill's familiar with it, I think we're well represented. What we're proposing and what we've proposed so far outside of this group, like I said, with the delegation and talking with them and within the past few weeks, we're not looking for just money for potatoes. I think we need to have money for agriculture, and it'd be a priority to develop these sources, to get the water when we can get it and use it when we need it. So, I'll leave you in good hands with George and Matt, but, you've heard my story, and I think that's really where I think this board ought to head. Thank you.
Thanks, Don. John Harker, I see your hand up as well. No, you have certainly experience in this board in its prior life, so happy to hear from you too.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. I don't know if you can see me or not, but been driving, so I haven't been able to listen to everything. I directed the program since its inception when Angus King walked over the blueberry fields and crunched the blueberries. That was the big drought of 1999-2000. And legislature and the grower organizations came together and actually funded a lot of money. I mean, we were talking about $5-6 million. So it went really well because that money helped not only some large farmers, but some smaller farmers as well. It was cost share money, much like NRCS, but it was very good. So Nancy, I applaud you for bringing this group together again, because it hasn't been in place since I retired 2014. So I'm glad you pulled it together. What I was going to mention is just before I left, the ag associations and myself, we put together a big survey. We came up with a $19 million worth of need, future need, from 2013 on. So there was already a need back then for that amount of money for new source development. And I knew a lot of the farmers, obviously Aroostook County, but there was a lot of small farmers in southern Maine as well, just had to get off small streams and had the ability, had the place to put a pond or drill a well. So I was going to recommend, I'm here today on behalf of Maine Farm Bureau, by the way, I forgot to mention that. If you decide you want to do another survey like that, farmers are willing to share their information with commodity groups, Farm Bureau, soil and water conservation districts. They played a big role in that survey. They're less likely to answer a survey if it's DEP or Department of Ag. That's just the way things are. But if working through there, if you had some funding through the Ag Development Grant Program, Specialty Crop Program to help do a survey, I think you would get another series like that that might give you some really good information to help you go forward with farmers and what their needs are. So that was one suggestion I was going to make. And Don mentioned the other one, you know, the BMPs and such, which was always a help to anybody. And I had, and maybe Mark Hedrick still has those files, but I had an Excel spreadsheet that actually helped. When a farmer called in and says, well, I don't know how much water I need, I had an Excel spreadsheet that we could fill out and we could come up with a water budget pretty quickly. So there's another possibility if you needed to build on that thing. And I know NRCS has some of those tools as well. So that's all I wanted to mention. I just want to thank you again for pulling this together again. I think it's great to get started, and Maine Farm Bureau stands to help you if there's anything we can do.
Thank you, John. Well, we're obviously building off of the great glide path and work that others contributed, so I appreciate your comments. I'm just looking at the time and know that we've been on this call for 2 hours. Again, the intent of this first meeting was simply to kind of raise some issues, get the dialogue going. Now the fun part begins, where we start digging into the guts of the issue, the duties of the board, the prioritization of areas of focus, and board governance as well. You all do get to elect a board chair. So we as staff members are certainly happy to do our best to craft an agenda for the next meeting of this board. We're looking at the calendar. We know it's probably best to have another meeting as soon as possible before we all get to, and you all get super busy out in the fields. But you know, some of the things that we do want to talk about in greater detail next time are going to be the resources that this board has at its disposal under the statute, and how you all want to move forward with that, digging into them. Don and John had some nice ideas. We can also invite other people to the conversation. Obviously, NRCS, Cooperative Extension, others could be part of that conversation. You know, it's pretty clear that BMP's investment and education and outreach is something that would be probably an easy win. But so these are the types of things that I'm hearing from you all, and what we can put to paper for an agenda to kick things off. Certainly, this board is going to be a work in progress. We all have our daily lives and priorities in front of us, but there is urgency. And we as staff will be looking to you all to help direct our resources and use of our time to help further things along over the course of this year and the coming years. So that's a long way of saying I think the next conversation will be as good, if not better, than this one. I'd like to get a survey of folks, and we can always do this offline through a doodle poll, et cetera, but can I hear from the board members as to whether or not they would like to have a meeting, you know, within the next 3 weeks or 4 weeks, knowing that field season for some or in preparation, et cetera, begins very rapidly. So what's the time frame we'd all like to come back to? Any thoughts on that?
I'll speak for me and Presque Isle. Anytime before about the 1st of May works great in my schedule, so I have some flexibility there.
Great. Thanks, Matt.
This is Abby. I would agree with that. May 1st as sort of being when the party's sort of over.
This is Jake Pearson. We're already in total production mode, so I will make time as need be for the meeting. That's just, it is what it is. We're going from March 1st till Thanksgiving. So whenever we get to do a meeting, but I think I agree the moving the ball rolling forward as fast as we can, I think is better for at least it'll give, maybe we can get some goals for the staff to work on while we're all busy trying to get our plants in the ground and ready to get them growing this summer, and then reconvene in the summer with maybe some more better road map about where we're going.
Thank you. Sounds like the sweet spot would be sometime in April. All right, we can do that. I'm assuming it'll also be virtual still, which has its pluses. I just want to ask, there are other folks on the call from the public. I see Wild Blueberry representatives, I see NRCS, et cetera. Certainly welcome to hear from you all with your ideas or input in the few minutes that we have remaining.
Hey, Nancy.
Hey, Eric.
This is Eric Vittorini, Executive Director of the Wild Blueberry Commission. Thanks for giving us a couple minutes here. I guess I would just, hearing the presentations today and thinking about the issues, what's the goal of this board? And I would suggest that maybe the goal is getting more sustainable water sources on more farms, right? So how can we do that? And I think that a lot of folks on the call today have hit on it, and it comes down to funding. Drilling a well is incredibly expensive. We can support that through the state. We can or support that through the NRCS. I've had some conversations with Matt Walker about this and some other folks. And there's some challenges right now that we need to focus on. One being, right now, in order for NRCS to pay for a well, it has to meet a pretty high standard of flow rate. And you don't really know what your flow rate is until after you drill it. And that's a huge risk for a grower that's going to, possibly have to pay for that well that they're hoping the NRCS will pay for if at the end of the day it does not meet the flow rate requirements. So how can we address that issue so that we can decrease the risk, and encourage more people to use irrigation to create sustainable irrigation sources on more main farms. And I'd also just generally agree with everything Don said. A lot of great points. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Eric. I see Nora, you have your hand up. You're welcome to introduce yourself. And
hi, should I take my camera? Will you be able to see me? Do you want to see me? I don't know.
Up to you. We'd love to see you.
So my name is Nora Schwartz, and I'm calling from the Freiburg area, and I'm on the Saco River Corridor Commission. So we talk about water things all the time with regards to, and I was glad that some people mentioned the increased amount of construction near bodies of water and how that's affecting things, and how that affects. But I couldn't help but think, as just an observer, that my heart goes out to the farmers. And even though some of the stories were they did the wrong thing and it wasn't done right and they're going to be corrected and they're going to be, sent in the right direction, they are trying to stay alive. And I feel like that's really, really important to the state of Maine. And I just wonder whether there's any possibility that there will be any collaborative discussion with regards to bulk water extraction and the farms that are potentially affected by that. Thank you.
Thanks, Nora. I think that certainly, speaking on behalf of my colleagues, so I will flag that. But, I think Bob Marvini's group could probably be talking about, again, water resources of the state, whether it's agriculture or other users, to help ground us as we talk about that. So I appreciate you raising that issue. Rachel Chapman, you had your hand up. You're welcome to say hello.
Hi, Rachel Chapman. I'm with UMaine in the School of Food and Agriculture, and I just wanted to say out loud that there's a group of us collaborators, both from DACF and Extension, who recently put out a survey, statewide survey for farmers looking at the impacts on the 2020 drought, and we're just finishing up that report, and we'll be happy to send it along and hope it will be useful.
Thank you for flagging that. I can't believe I forgot to mention that. So really appreciate you all doing that work first and foremost. And we'd be delighted to hear about that when you're ready. Earl Bunting.
Yeah, I'm the owner of Dole's Orchard in Leamington, and I'm the president of the Maine State Pomological Society, which is the tree fruit growers in the state. There's a lot of representation from up north. We need a little bit more, I think, from southern Maine.
Well, thank you for definitely mentioning that. I'm hopeful that some of our southern Maine members can do just that, but all of these meetings will be open to the public, and we're always welcoming of input and suggestions and collaboration. So thank you for reflecting that, Earl.
Yep.
Matt Walker, glad to see you raising your hand. Welcome.
Hi, Nancy, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matt Walker. I'm the NRCS State Conservationist, and I just want to share with you guys that we are prioritizing response to the drought with our resource concerns and our funding, and also that we are here to help in any way we can. So as you mentioned, different tools and resources available, Nancy and the board, we're glad to participate and help just however we can. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. I can certainly imagine my wheels are spinning about, perhaps there could be a discussion by you or your staff about the current programmatics, the current requirements, et cetera, so that we are all kind of understanding the current terrain and also what might be on the horizon with any potential funding opportunities, et cetera. So glad you're here and participatory. Well, with that, I'm not seeing any other hands being raised. I will work to determine an April date for our next meeting and work on an agenda that we can share with the board members to make sure it meets everyone's expectations. We will likely be creating a website, a webpage for this board in particular, where we will have meeting materials put up and capture some notes and takeaways from the meetings, just for those who want to track that. And with that, I just want to thank everybody for their time. I think we've got our work cut out for us, but it's very important work. And certainly we've got some good people here that together maybe we're going to be able to make some lasting improvements in this particular arena for Maine agricultural water users. Any final comments or questions or observations? Okay. Well, thank you everybody for your time and participation. I look forward to speaking with you in a month or so.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.